Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the podcast and the YouTube channel. Sal Vetri here, and we're going to be taking a first look, and a pretty thorough look, as I've done, 10, 12 hours of research already, maybe a little bit more, for the XFL Week 3 slate. I've gone back, I've looked at everything that happened last week from an advanced stats metric, from a snap count, a usage standpoint. All of that stuff has been wrapped up in a podcast, is wrapped up in a couple of Excel sheets for snap count notes and usage targets and touches for your running backs, receivers, and tight ends. All that's on Patreon if you are interested. Content exclusively over there to the patrons, about 350 people over there. Thank you so much. If you want to join Patreon, you can find it linked up down below. But welcome back if you're brand spanking new here. We've been covering the XFL since before the season even started. Very excited as I cover multiple sports in the daily fantasy sports aspects. If you're listening on the audio version, we got up to number 7 as of yesterday in the fantasy sports podcast ranking. So thank you to everybody who's been subscribing to the podcast. Continue to do that. Take a couple seconds. I doubt we'll be able to crack number 1 and knock ESPN and some of the people up there off, but why not try? I don't know if they're cranking out the daily XFL and PGA and NBA videos all in the same day, so maybe we'll get enough algorithmic stuff in there. So please hit the subscribe button. It takes a couple seconds, and if you hit that the rate and review button, the 5 stars, that stuff also helps. The subscribe helps a ton. A lot of people on the same day apparently boost the rankings. We went from the mid-20s to number 7 overall. So thank you all so much. Appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel as well. As we approach 20,000 subscribers each week in the XFL, we get around 100 to 200 of you. So thank you all so much. Appreciate it. So with this said, week 2 in the books, all that stuff over on Patreon. Very excited for week 3 of the XFL. It's going to be, I would say, a little bit more clear as we move forward, but spots now that the salaries in DraftKings, I commend them on it. Some guys are still underpriced. Some guys' prices are reducing for some odd reasons. But I do believe that they made it at least difficult this week. And you can see over my shoulder, what do you have over my shoulder is 4 quarterbacks that are all $10,000 or above. And honestly, they've been the only quarterbacks in play, in my opinion, through the first 2 weeks of the season. Obviously, Landry Jones only playing last week, but you get the gist there. They make it challenging by pricing all the quarterbacks up, with Philip Walker in the number 1 passing offense and seems to be the number 1 quarterback in this league for fantasy purposes, is now priced to 11.5. And you're going to get to the wide receivers page and you're going to see 2 of the more reliable for the first 2 weeks if you've been playing them. Luckily, I have, and I'm sure a lot of Patrons have as well, based on the tiers. The 2 top wide receivers in the league through the first 2 weeks are now priced up, but there's still value to be found. We'll discuss some of that here in this video. Again, throughout the week, I will have my tiers and rankings on Friday over on Patreon, and then also on Saturdays, the Closing Thoughts podcast on Patreon as well. Exactly where I'm going to be going, discussing where I believe ownership will be coming in, taking a look at some ownership numbers as well. And then the other big thing will be the stuff that's already happened, the recap, targets, touches, usage, snaps, a podcast on that as well. So all that, again, sponsored by my Patreon channel, linked up down below. I'll also pop it up above right here at some point, maybe even now if I remember. It'll come up with the exclusive content. You can check all of that out. So without further ado, let's get into this video. So starting at the top, I have 5 quarterbacks labeled as interests. I have not yet classified them as yeses or maybes or nos. They're just all marked as an X, which means maybe, just to indicate my interest in them. So there's only going to be 8 quarterbacks, so you're going to say, Sal, what are you doing? Well, I'll talk through how I like each of them compared to the others. It'll depend on where you go with the other positions, right? If you can have all the money and you can get up to Tampa Bay, and you can get up to Philip Walker against Tampa Bay, by all means, I think it's a fine option. I think he'll still rein in. Obviously, the price is going to make him a little bit more difficult to get to, but if you're finding value at wide receiver, running back, defense, obviously really easy to do that. Last week, you've seen the $3,000 Seattle defense score 20 plus fantasy points, 23 to be exact. So there's ways to get to him, and I believe there will be. You're just going to have to sacrifice in other spots. So St. Louis's secondary last week looked legit. You had Philip Walker throwing 3 touchdowns, all to Cam Phillips, who we'll get to, but only 175 yards. He only attempted 3 deep passes, 20 plus yards, that's classified as, compared to 11 in week 1. The secondary from St. Louis ranks number 2 through 2 weeks. They do look good. Now you get a 5th ranked Tampa Bay secondary and pass rush in Tampa Bay against Philip Walker this week. It looks a little bit better for Philip Walker, who did not show as much mobility this past week. 2 rushes, 17 yards, nothing terrible. 11,500 is an extremely steep price point for, look, you got the ceiling game week 1. You didn't get it last week. If you get a performance around 25 fantasy points, there's a good chance that one of Te'amu, Landry Jones, Cardale Jones is scoring somewhere around 22 to 24 to not make his price tag worth it. So he's in play. He'll probably project out as the highest scoring overall QB or close to it, but I don't know if he's actually worth this expensive price tag relative to the other players when it means sacrificing some of the more consistent wide receivers that we've been seeing. Cardale Jones at 10,800. He's going to face LA, the Wildcats, this week, who, again, after week one, fired their defensive coordinator. They rank 4th in coverage and 6th in pass rush. Cardale Jones, this is actually very surprising and interesting and important. DC and Cardale Jones, 21 play action pass attempts. That is 9 more than the next closest in the league. Play action, as you know, sets up a lot more efficiency, just in effectiveness. Just look at Ryan Tannehill from the NFL with Tennessee. It made him look like a genius. It made him look fantastic. But what's interesting is they're setting this up without really any major threats in the backfield right now. Presley and Pumphrey have both been very meh so far to start the season. Nobody's standing out. So once that gets clicking, this offense might even click on even more cylinders. They get Tompkins back last week, Rashad Ross running more routes. I do like Cardale Jones at 10,800. He has the highest average time to throw of all the starters, which is not good. I guess it's a little bit skewed. It could either mean it's good or mean it's bad. It could either mean that he's getting more time from his offensive line, or B, he's holding on to the ball a lot. It's a combination of both right now. He's scrambling a little bit. The offensive line is getting there, and that's indicated by the fact that through 2 weeks, he is the number 1 quarterback under pressure compared to amount of snaps under pressure in the league. But under that pressure, he has an 80% adjusted completion percentage. He's been lights out under pressure. He's been really good. We'll see if that continues to hold up. 10,800, definitely in play. Landry Jones, the first quarterback to go over 300 passing yards in the XFL. This Dallas offense ran the second most plays last week, only second to St. Louis at 74. Good to see that. Seattle ranks 7th in coverage. Now, he attempted 6 deep passes in his debut, only completed 1 of them, had an interception on 1 of the deep passes as well. Attempted only 5 play action passes. Not great, pretty below average. It was a short passing game clinic indicated by attempting only 6 deep passes on 74 total offensive plays. Short passing game. That's what you got for the most part out of Landry Jones, but it was effective. They have a lot of pieces out there. Donald Parham, he was eyeing down, looked like his favorite target. Jeff Badette got very much involved. They still have Flynn Nagel. They were using both of their primary running backs in the passing game in this one. It looked like it was all coming together with Landry Jones back. I think at 10,600, the choice between him and Cardale Jones is very interesting. I probably lean Cardale Jones for more security and the weapons getting healthier there in DC, but I do think they're both in play. Jordan Ta'amu, deservingly so, is in the $10,000 range. I thought this might actually happen. You can see on the Patreon podcast. I did that podcast before the salaries came out, like an hour before. So I was actually I'm not even going to say the word right. I was assuming and guessing, I guess, is the words that we'll go with here, that some people are telling me it's not Temu. I'm going to go with Ta'amu. I heard some random ESPN interview say that on YouTube when I try to look up how to pronounce his name. They ran 88 plays last week. And this number, again, I'm using a couple different sources here. 88 plays on offense was 14 more than what you got from the next closest, which was Dallas. They ran a ton of plays. They're still a run-first team. Both weeks, they ran at least 52% of their plays as run plays. But when you're running 88 total plays, it doesn't matter. You're still going to have a high elevation of overall pure quality or quantity of passing plays relative to the percentage of them. He's completing 78.1% of his passes. That is the most out of any 2-week starters so far. Philip Nelson, who started week 1 for Dallas, has completed more, but again, he was throwing like 2-yard passes to running backs. He's only attempted 3 deep passes in the first 2 weeks. New York is number 1 in pressure rate, so that might lead to more Ta'amu scrambles, which is good to see. It's interesting to see that he's number 3 in rushing yards in the XFL as a quarterback and number 2 in passing yards, slightly 4 yards behind Cardale Jones. He's been fantastic. You're getting good value at Jordan Ta'amu. I do think that if you need to just save $1,000 off of the Cardale Joneses or close to it, and definitely the Philip Walkers, Jordan Ta'amu looks like one of the prime options this week. Pass rush against New York might be a concern, but it could also just lead to more running opportunities. And finally, I did label Brandon Silvers as an X in interest. This probably is not somebody I end up getting to at $7,500, but it's important to note that, look, he's dirt cheap. You're saving like $2,600 off of all the other guys, at least on average around $3,500 you're saving compared to all the other guys that I just named. That's important if you want to load up on wide receivers and running backs. And honestly, so far this season, it doesn't make sense to load up on running backs that are high price, but a lot of stable, at least through 2 weeks, as much as that can be stability, wide receivers so far. I think that he's at least the best cheap option right now. There's not many. There's going to be 2 to 3 at best. But the good thing is that he has been taking deep shots. He's number 2 in the league behind Philip Walker by 2 deep shots. And you might get Kason Williams actually active this week. He's been missing the first 2 weeks, the wide receiver 1 on this depth chart next to Keenan Reynolds. So number 2 in deep passes. It's a low upside price play at best. Dallas, though, does rank 7th in pass rush and 8th in coverage. So it's not a great quarterback who's going to take deep shots against a bad defense and maybe gets one of his top receivers back on the depth chart. Again, it's a cheap price play. Moving over to the running back position, if you have not yet already on the audio version, take 2 seconds after this and just hit the subscribe button on iTunes, whether you're on Spotify, whatever it might be. It really does help. And if you can leave a 5-star rating review, it goes a long way if you're getting any value from this. Same thing on the YouTube channel. Feel free to hit that subscribe button. Thank you. So, running back position here, I have currently 7 players listed as interests, and this can change and this can reduce, and I'll talk about all that later in the week here on probably Thursday evening, but also on the Saturday Closing Thoughts Patreon podcast, where I'll go through my exposures, who I'm liking the most. We'll go over the cash game and the GPP tiers over on Patreon as well. So Jaquise Patrick here. So interesting. He's 4,400. Here's the thing. There's so many running back by committees in this league. 5, 6, 7 of the teams are running back by committees, and you saw exactly 51% of the snaps each was played by both Patrick and they played 37 snaps each. There were 72 total plays ran by Tampa Bay in week 2. Patrick and De'Veon Smith. But what you did get to see was Patrick is a lot cheaper. This week he's about $2,000 cheaper than De'Veon Smith, and he actually ended up seeing 15 touches last week, which ended up making his overall touch count on the season go to 24. So 15 touches is good to see when De'Veon Smith only ended up seeing, I believe, 13 last week. He's also much more effective, getting 91 total yards on that. He's 7th in elusive rating as a backup running back for half the season so far, if not the entire season, splitting it 50-50. I don't think he's a fantastic play. This is not ranked by he's my number one play. No, it just gets ranked after I sort it by the X's. I don't know if it's by salary. I still don't know at this point, but he's just 4,400. So in these situations where there's running back by committees, 2 guys, even 3 guys in the backfield, just give me the cheap one, right? Give me the one who I get to save $2,000 on. You see Patrick's role increasing from week 1 to week 2 pretty significantly. They're both running similar routes. I think 30 routes run total between the two of them. You saw De'Veon Smith run 16, Patrick run 14, so pretty much split down the middle. If you're just going to tell me that they're going to be playing half the time each, and at least Patrick looked better last week and so far on the season more efficient, just give me the guy who's $2,000 cheaper. Cameron Arden-Payne broke the slate last week by far, the number one running back of the week, the number one running back of the season, and his performance became the number one running back in the first 2 weeks of the season. Look, he's the only running back with more than 115-plus yard run this year, and he has 3. Nobody else has 2. He has 3. He had a 4th one in week 1 called back, a 25-yard run called back for a hold as well. Dallas ran 74 plays last week, like I said. That's going to elevate his overall opportunities. He's number 1 in running backs routes run as well, 43 routes run for Cameron Arden-Payne. So not only did he get fed on the ground and was explosive, 3 breakaway runs of 15-plus yards, number 1 in routes run, and he played 66% of the snaps. So the thing that you got to see in Dallas was Lance Dunbar was still active, but unlike week 1 when Austin Walter and Marquise Young played 14 and 15 snaps respectively, those 2 players combined for a total of 4 snaps. 4 total snaps ended up being 5% of the overall snap counts for Dallas. You ended up only getting 2 running backs active this week instead of 4. It really helped Cameron Arden-Payne getting going on the ground. He's 8,300 now. I don't like paying up for running backs in this league, especially when they're this expensive, but it's hard to ignore at least what he did last week and the new usage of the backfield in Dallas. Matt Jones for St. Louis. St. Louis, again, ran 88 plays, back-to-back weeks of 52% plus run plays for the St. Louis offense. You saw 43% of the snaps in week 2 for Matt Jones, nowhere near the full-on workload he had week 1 in terms of his overall touches. Now, he had 21 touches week 1. He had, I guess, nowhere near as a stretch. He had 17 touches last week, 16 on the ground. He had the 1 reception that skewed his overall results by a 25-yard touchdown catch early on in that game. He has a league-high 48 touches now through 2 weeks. My concern is the price point. He is right now $7,500. He is, by all accounts, in a very strong running back by committee. Now, last week he did not practice on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, and then he did practice full on Friday, so maybe that's a reason why he got a little bit more limited snaps. But his running back mate at 5,200, and Christine Michael played 49% of the snaps. More snaps than him. Saw exactly the same touches. 17 touches, 16 carries, and 1 reception. Yeah, Christine Michael, though, not great this year. 14th in elusive rating, 24 routes run for him and Jones each. That number is pretty much around average at this point right now, about 12 per week. 12 to 15 per week in the XFL is on average what these running backs are running. So, similar to what I talked about earlier with Patrick and Tampa Bay, you get Michael for $2,300 less than Matt Jones. Neither of these guys have been all that effective. They're running very similar routes. They're seeing similar touches in terms of last week and really the second half of week 1. So, yes, Matt Jones saw a good amount more. He had a workload higher, about 6-7 touches higher in week 1. How much do we weight that? Do we weight that by $2,300 in a matchup against New York this week? Is St. Louis going to continue to go out there and run 80-plus routes in a matchup where New York only ran 49 offensive plays last week? Disgusting. It's a little bit concerning. The fact that Matt Jones is up to $7,500, it's probably more of a stay away spot for me. Lance Dunbar, 6,600, played 53% of the snaps, played on the field with Cameron Arden-Payne at times last year. Only running back in the league to see 6+ targets in back-to-back weeks. He's third in running backs routes run, right now with 34 on 36 total pass plays that he's been on the field with, and 22 total touches, 11 of those being receptions, 11 of them being carries. So 6,600 price points coming up, but he's probably in line to see 4, 5, 6 targets yet again. He's going to catch 90% of them throughout the season, if not higher. So Lance Dunbar, you're probably getting a shoe-in for 8 to 12 fantasy points a week. And if the touchdown comes, it's some upside there. So probably a safer play for cash games. Tournament upside is surely there, but I'm probably not going to have an overall touch upside of like 16 to 20. Elijah Hood for LA, 64% of the snaps with Juwan Harris out. The rest, 37% of the snaps to Larry Rose behind him. No receptions yet this season. The game flows have been hurting them as they've been playing from behind. And now you get the 2-0 DC defenders coming in with looks like the number one overall defense in the league through 2 weeks. Concerning spot for Elijah Hood, who only has 22 carries in 2 games as the primary back. 10 carries last week, 12 week 1. 5,600 is a nice price point for anybody getting 12 carries or 12 total touches in a game, running some routes, but there is concerns around what this matchup is going to be for him. Tim Cook is interesting at 4,200 in my last interest at running back currently because Darius Victor got hurt after playing 5 snaps in the first quarter for New York in week 2. Tim Cook ended up playing 70+% of the snaps after that. I'd expect 60 to 70+% of the workload for him if Darius Victor was to miss. You likely get at least 10 to 12 carries out of him, even if Darius Victor plays. New York only ran 49 plays last week. They've been 50. I think they ran 51 plays in week 1. Slowest team in the league. They look absolutely gross, and their offense is a mess after Matt McGloin erupted last week on the sidelines, kind of calling out his entire coaching staff and his team and everything. It looked not great. So Tim Cook at 4,200, only in play for me if Darius Victor is out. You probably then get Matt Colburn as the backup running back, maybe some Stockton if he is active for this game. Moving over to the wide receiver page, and I'll call out one thing quickly here, is that drafters.com is the little thing up above if you're watching on YouTube. Also, it's a snake draft format, and they announced, I saw on Twitter today, that in a few weeks they're going to be announcing their best ball leagues. There's no best ball right now. Draft.com is gone. So if you're listening to this, you heard of best ball, you like best ball, you've played it or you want to play it, check out drafters.com. It's coming soon. Promo code SAL100, SAL100, 100% deposit bonus up to $50. You want to try out the online snake drafts they have, the rank 'em format, want to put $10 into it, promo code SAL100, get you $10 right back. There's the plug, helps me, but also helps you. And yes, their formatting best balls are coming pretty soon, so pretty cool. Wide receivers, I won't spend all the time here. You can read some of the notes. I don't want to hold everybody's day up here, but I do have 20 players listed on the wide receiver page. Again, it's an 8-team league. This is definitely going to get filtered down. I probably will on the tiers will have somewhere around 15 to 20 names, honestly, but in a player pool, I wouldn't have this many names at wide receiver. But starting at the top, again, no ranking order here. Jeff Badet ran 33 routes last week, saw 9 targets with Landry Jones, and 24% of his routes came from the slot. He had 2 deep targets on the 6 attempts. Very good to see. Again, 74 plays ran in week 1 or week 2 by Dallas with this new offense. That's good to see. Seattle is 7th in coverage, and he's likely to see Clark, the cornerback for Seattle, who has an 80.6 rating. Currently, through 2 weeks, their number 1 rated cornerback. 80.6 is pretty average, pretty decent. But Badet, again, number 1 pick. I'll keep calling to it. Tons of speed. You get to see that game-breaking speed. I do think that 8,600 is a price point if Landry Jones is going to be more comfortable this week, maybe attempt more deep passes, more than 6, be a little bit more accurate on them. That's going to help Badet the most. These next 2 players are just too cheap, maybe even the next 3, but DeAndre Tompkins returned last week, only played 64% of the snaps. He was labeled as a backup. He didn't run backup snaps, though. Malachi Dupre just didn't even play, dropping to 4th in the depth chart pretty significantly. 9 targets for Tompkins, caught 6 of them, had a touchdown. And on his 9 targets, the 3 that he just didn't catch, 2 of them were dropped. So he had the opportunities in this game. 26 routes run, more than half of them from the slot, 55%. That's very good to see. He started to get more snaps out of the slot compared to Eli Rogers for DC. 5,700 is a strong price point. Seemed to have an early connection with Cardell Jones. Donald Parham against Seattle. Again, we've touched on how Seattle's 7th in defense in the coverage. Donald Parham is too cheap. We saw Landry Jones have eyes for him. 11 targets last week. 2 of them were called back on penalties. 1 not a catch. 1 was a catch. So he should have had 13 targets in that game. He's ran 59 routes in the last 2 weeks. 29 last week, or 30 last week. 29 the week before. He's 3rd in the XFL with 17 targets. He's a tight end. He's still listed as a tight end on their depth chart, and he's 3rd in the XFL in targets. 11 last week. 6 in week 1. Clear connection with Jones. I think he looks pretty good. Nick Holley at 4,400 is finally labeled as a wide receiver now. He was tied with Cam Phillips, for last week, 33 routes run. He's safe for like 5 to 7 targets in this offense. Look, he's 4,400, not a ton of upside, but if you're looking for a cheap wide receiver, he does stand out. Cam Phillips, 11,100. Highest priced wide receiver, second highest priced player on the slate. He's number 2 in targets with 18, number 4 in yards with 140, number 3 in receptions with 12, number 2 in routes run with 73. He's the number 1 target so far through 2 weeks and the number 1 passing game. Obviously, it looks fantastic, but the concern is the price. He's not going to score 3 touchdowns every week like last week. He's probably not going to score a touchdown a week, to be honest with you. There's going to be a couple weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4, where he just doesn't score a touchdown like he has the first 2 weeks. So at 11,100, it's starting to get tricky. I still think it looks fantastic if you can afford him. It just gets more difficult to do so. Similar things can be said for Nelson Spruce at $10,900. LA's number 1 weapon, the number 1 wide receiver in the XFL in every reasonable category. He's number 1 in routes run with 81, number 1 in yards with 181, number 1 in targets with 24, number 1 in receptions with 17. He's number 3 in yards per route run in efficiency metrics by Pro Football Focus. Check them out, pff.com. 20 plus routes run for anybody with 20 plus routes. He's number 3 in yards per route run. He's run the most slot routes at 69, a very effective spot for effective wide receivers. I do prefer Nelson Spruce over Cam Phillips. Nothing against Phillips. Spruce just seems more consistent running out of the slot. But either way, both of these guys are fantastic. This is the concern. Can you play both of them like last week and the week before while also playing Philip Walker, while also playing an expensive quarterback? It gets a lot more difficult now. Eli Rogers is top 10 in routes run, number 9 with 62, top 5 in targets, top 3 in receptions this year, running 50 routes on the season out of the slot. Good to see that. 3rd in slot targets with 13. You will likely see Mike Stevens, who has given up 11 targets or 11 receptions in 2 weeks and 104 yards out of the slot, 95 rating against. So that's going to help both Eli Rogers and also Tompkins played more than 50% of his snaps out of the slot last week. That will also help him. McCall McKay at 8,800, one of the guys that I'd actually rather avoid, just get the Jeff Badet in the same price range, but he is on here because he's just still running routes, 59 routes in 2 weeks. Only player to run more than 19 routes for New York last week. He ran 30, but pretty gross all around in this New York offense. Dan Williams, I'll only have interest if his roommate, Aaron Murray, is back under center. He only ran 24 routes last week after running 40 plus in week 1, 4th most on the team in just 60% of the snaps. Not great. LaDainian Washington, in my eyes, is still the number 1 receiver in St. Louis at $8,000. He's not priced like it, though, where you have a $10,100 DeMorney Pearson L above him. Very interesting price point, in my opinion, because Washington was a co-leader in targets, in routes run and snaps with his teammate Alonzo Russell. Now, Washington ended up running 66 routes, though, through the 2 weeks, which is by far the most on the team by about 15 to 20. He's 2nd in targets on the team behind Pearson-L, but only by 2. He has 13. Pearson-L is 15. Pearson-L played 26% less snaps last week. My opinion, Washington's still the number 1 receiver in this offense. Pearson-L, though, for some reason, is $2,100 more, even though he's going to be playing probably equal to more likely less than Washington. And they're being used very similarly in this offense, except Washington's running more routes. So I would prefer Washington to Pearson-L for the price discount. Pearson-L is strangely priced up, in my opinion. Sammy Coates at $7,700. It seems like a spot where I want to go right back to it, but it's really hard to. Only ran 22 routes last week. That was 4th among wide receivers on this team. Holly, you ended up having Holly, Khalil Lewis, and Cam Phillips run more routes than Sammy Coates. The concerning thing was that Blake Johnson ran 12 routes and Sam Mobley ran 5. Those 2 players were rotating in for Sammy Coates. I don't think there was any injury. I will update you throughout the week if so. So very concerning. He's down to 7,700. It's an interesting bounce back spot, but the routes came down from week 1 to week 2. Not good to see. Alonzo Russell is tied for 34 routes and 85% of the snaps with Washington and St. Louis. He has just 1 deep target in 2 weeks because Ta'amu's only thrown 3 total. So it seems like Russell's deep targets, where he scored a touchdown on week 1, are his only viable upside at 5,900. More of a GPP play, but even then it seems thin. Flynn Nagel's priced down to 5,700. I get it. He didn't do much in the debut of Landry Jones last week, but he's still the number 3 player in the XFL in routes run at 69. Again, didn't show much chemistry, but you're getting him at a price point where he's coming down, and he's number 1 on the team last week with 82% snaps. So he'll be on the field a lot. He'll be out of the slot. It looked like Landry Jones had more eyes for Parham and Jeff Badet, but it's just a 1-week sample. Price point coming down, not a terrible option. Jalen Tolliver is number 4 in the XFL in routes run with 67. He'll be in play for me and on my radar if Aaron Murray is back, but you saw Quentin Flowers look terrible for like a quarter of the attempts last week, or 50 attempts. You saw Taylor Cornelius not look good either, gave up a defensive score as well. So Tolliver's upside, as well as Dan Williams, probably leaning on Aaron Murray, believe it or not. A couple guys left here. Reese Horn is top 10 in routes run in the league. Number 1 in his team last week. He saw 8 targets as well. You're going to get Cornelius, Cornelius was the guy who was looking at Reese Horn more. So he had a team high 76% of the snaps last week, ran a lot of slot routes. So Reese Horn at 4,200. I would have more interest in Horn if Cornelius is back under center. For $100 more, I'd have more interest in Tolliver if it ends up actually being Aaron Murray. Joe Horn was 3,800. I played him last week in my main lineup at 3,400, and he was an absolute dumpster. 19 routes run. Last week, not great. Again, only McKay ran more than 19 routes. He ran 30. Could have been blowout related. Could have been when, the offense comes off when Matt McGloin does, but it looked like McGloin just ended up getting benched. Very concerning. Don't really want to play anything in New York unless Darius Victor is out. Tim Cook becomes more appealing. Last two guys here, Adonis Jennings is for some reason $3,000 flat. So this is fitting if you get Saeed Blacknall, ran 43 routes week 1, and Trey McBride, who was active last week but just didn't play. If you get those two guys back, Jennings probably drops down the depth chart, but he saw 5 targets and ran 28 routes last week. He's $3,000 flat. I'm not jumping for joy to play him, but it's definitely a missed price here by probably about, $800 to $1,200. Rashad Ross at 9,400. Again, he ran ahead of Dupree as the wide receiver 3, running 26 routes. He's number 1 in the league in yards per route run, an elite 3.13 yards per route run, just showing his deep ball upside after catching 4 balls for 95 yards last week. He has yet to play a snap out of the slot, so it's all upside for him. He has 4 deep receptions this season of 20-plus yards. Nobody else has over 2, so 2x the entire league in deep receptions on 5 deep targets. And finally, Kason Williams, who has not played the first 2 weeks for Seattle. I think at $5,000, he becomes an interesting play that will not be owned if he's fully healthy to go, where you have a guy like Brandon Silvers throwing the second most deep passes of 20-plus yards in the league so far. It makes Kason Williams very interesting. So with that all said, that is the Week 3 XFL DraftKings preview, DFS, whatever you want to call it, fantasy football preview for Week 3. Again, I'll be back later in the week to give you some of my closing thoughts. If you want more matchup-based, this cornerback versus receiver, I'll get into that. I'll get into ownership discussions, the tiers, all of that is on Patreon. If you're interested, again, check it out, linked up down below. I'm an independent content creator, so you can go ahead and you can support me by subscribing over on Patreon if you would like, and also subscribing here as this show comes to an end. If you're listening at work, if you're listening on your commute, whatever it might be, if you're somewhere safe that you can pull over, whatever it might be, stoplight, or if you're just at your desk, take those extra couple of seconds and hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel if you're watching there. But also, very important, on the podcast, let's see if we can crack the top 5. I don't think we're going to get first. Maybe we can if we get an overwhelming support system of a bunch of subscribers on the podcast. Again, totally free to do so. And also, if you leave a review, that helps as well. So thank you so much. My name's Sal. You already know that. Also, follow me on Twitter if you want sort of a free sample of what Patreon is. I do give out a lot of meaningful tweets. I posted all the wide receiver snap counts today as well for every single team. So follow me over on Twitter at SalVetryDFS. Peace out, gang. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Above my head, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, I do ask you if you can please hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a good amount to reach more people. You can also follow me on Twitter. That's over there. Right in the corner is my at SalVetryDFS Twitter. And then above, you'll find my Patreon link. You can click on that if you want more exclusive content for me. Or a video is going to pop up, so why don't you check that one out as well. I think it's going to be beneficial for you. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.